Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage MethodSpace, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Summer Lopez, who is Penn's Chief Program Officer for Free Expression. And we're going to discuss this recent report, Speech in the Machine, Generative AI's Implications for Free Expression and Related Issues. But before we get started, if you are new to MethodSpace, this is a blog community sponsored by Sage Publishing, and we're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting research, writing about it, and sharing results in all kinds of ways. And you can see at the heart of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think whether you are a brand new researcher, an academic writer, or a very experienced one, we all have something to learn. And that's why I enjoy having these kinds of opportunities, because I know that, I will learn a lot. So to begin with, would you just introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Janet. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Summer Lopez, and I'm the Chief Program Officer for Free Expression at PEN America. And if you're not familiar with PEN America, we are a literary and human rights organization that defends and celebrates freedom of expression. And I've been with the organization for about 6 years now, and leading up our advocacy and research and policy work around issues of free expression in the US and globally.
So I think, academic writers might not be as familiar with PEN. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to introduce your work, and especially with this really, I think, profound report that connects a lot of important dots, because we're also very concerned about free expression, because researchers need the free pursuit of important questions, and our readers are primarily in the social research arena, social sciences. So we're looking at human problems, and being able to study them and discuss them in the classroom freely. So I think these issues really touch on our writers as well. So, I would like to just ask you to, talk a little bit about, how these issues are exacerbated by particularly the generative AI tools that have kind of burst upon the scene.
Sure. And I can say, just to start, PEN America has also been working on sort of issues of free speech on campuses and academic freedom for a number of years as well. And we are very engaged right now in addressing a lot of the legislation we've seen coming out to restrict what can be taught and discussed in classrooms at both K through 12 and higher education levels. And, as we were discussing before we started, Janet, the sort of all of these things sort of happening at one time, I think, is really putting tremendous new pressures on writers of all sorts and on academics in particular. And we undertook this report about generative AI and free expression because we really recognize that, as a new technology of this sort comes along, it's going to have a number of implications that we can't fully anticipate. But we know it's going to have significant implications for freedom of expression, for the literary and writing community in the largest sense, and the creative community in the largest sense. And so we really wanted to put something out there to at least say, these are issues that we need to be thinking about from a free expression perspective as generative AI evolves. And we, again, we can't entirely anticipate where it's going to go. But we did something similar a number of years ago on the issue of disinformation. We did a report on that in 2017. Projecting some ways in which we thought the increased prevalence of disinformation was going to impact free expression. And at the time we kind of said, these things might sound far-fetched now, but we should be concerned about them. And of course, all of them sound like they describe our exact reality when you look back at that report today. And so, part of the thinking of this report was to think about what are some of the implications going to be of generative AI in particular, both as a technology that is based on the use of existing text and the written word, and as a technology that is going to, essentially replicate to a certain degree the writing and work of human expression. And so, we looked at that from both sort of the perspective of what does that mean in a kind of a philosophical way? What does that mean for the meaning of the written word? What does that mean for how we understand writing and how we think about written content? as well as how it's going to exacerbate some of the specific threats to free expression that we at Penn have been working on and concerned about for a long time, including things like disinformation, online abuse, censorship, bias, and things like that. And so, we really looked particularly, at what this means for writers. What are some of the anxieties we're hearing from writers in the creative sphere, in the nonfiction sphere, in the journalistic sphere, and the academic sphere? I think we're seeing obviously concerns about the use of writers' work to feed generative AI, to train generative AI tools, without compensation, without recognition. We see deep concerns about the fact that generative AI is also trained on sort of all of the information that is out there, not all of which is equally reliable. And so what does that mean for students or researchers and how they might make use of it? And what are the implications for sort of how people understand writing and the written word going forward with the sort of knowledge that these tools are out there as well?
Well, and just pick up on a couple of the things that you mentioned. So, we're learning every day about the ways that the technology companies have pirated books and articles, kind of an unintended consequence of the open access movement, where a lot of scholarly journals are available online. So those are being swallowed up, entire catalogs of publishers without any request, consent, permission, let alone compensation for that writing. Just the expectation that this would be fine is mind-boggling. But I think one of the implications, particularly for scholarly writers, is that our writing is done in this kind of careful way where we're identifying a problem, saying, well, here's how it's grounded in the literature, here's how I studied it, here's the why it's credible, and then here's what the discussion of the results and coming forth with some recommendations. So there's an integrity to the work, and that's what's important to us, because a lot of work that academic writers do is completely unpaid. If you contribute to a scholarly journal, there is no remuneration at all, for that. What you have is the integrity of your work that is going out in the world. And it seems to me that, the disruption of that, because now, some little bits of what you wrote are being mashed up with, social media comments and, some, random, information that could be totally disinformation and taken completely out of context. And to me, that is a part of the free expression, to be able to communicate your work in a way that is coherent. And is that something that you're hearing from other writers as well, as a concern?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, your point about it being sort of an unfortunate consequence of the open access movement, I think that's part of the concern too, right? Is the access to information. The fact that all of these things have been open and available on the internet has been very valuable and important. It's one of the benefits of the internet. And I think it has had the consequence that some places are also kind of putting up new barriers to protect their content. News outlets have faced the same issue, recognizing that actually the entire history of their archives is being swept up and used in these to train these tools. And so what can they do to, some of them have started to work out deals with some of the AI companies, so at least they're being compensated in some way and they know what's being used and what isn't being used. But, as you say, it's sort of, we're a little bit retrofitting this now, because all of this is kind of already fed into these tools and their development. In our report, we mentioned the fan fiction community, which has been built on the notion that all of this content is out there in the world for everybody and there's no restrictions on any of it. And they've discovered that all of that basically has been swept up into the AI tools. And so I think in the academic sphere, that's really concerning, both from, from the sort of ownership perspective, but as you say, also from the perspective of then how might that information be misused or be, manipulated by the algorithms in some way that isn't how it was certainly intended to be used. And then do people have to think about that, and what sort of might, what sort of chilling effect might that have on people as they think about the research that they're putting out into the world as well?
Right. And where you choose to publish and
Right.
and how you share your information, that you might be more circumspect about putting something into the open web if with an open access journal, because you don't know, you can't there's no protection for it.
Right. And I think some of those, I think that a lot of those outlets will have to start changing their policies and putting things in place where they are stating that things can't be just sort of swept up. But again, it feels like now we're doing that retroactively.
Yes.
A lot of it has already happened. And the cat is a little bit out of the bag to some extent already.
Right. So, I mean, one of the points that really struck me from the report was that I'd like you to just, build on a little bit or talk a little bit more, is the concern that people will lose trust in language itself and thus in one another, and introducing the ambiguity between original and synthetic expression. So, if I'm reading something, to what extent is this a mashup of things that get sort of spit out by some AI, or
right.
somebody actually sit down and think this through? So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that as a topic.
Sure. And I think, this does go back to sort of some of the concerns we've expressed around disinformation for a long time. That obviously has been the case on social media, kind of the ability to assess what is credible information and what isn't, that's become much more challenging in recent years to begin with, right? And we've seen the implications of that, and we've done a lot of work on sort of media literacy issues. And one of the things for us as a free expression organization is that we're always concerned that the solutions to these problems might also be problematic. If lots of countries have laws against disinformation, obviously those get used primarily against journalists and dissidents and people trying to speak truth to power. And so, that's not the kind of solution that we want to see. We generally try to think about, how do you empower consumers of information to be more, more nuanced, more able to make nuanced assessments of what's credible and what isn't. Generative AI makes all of that just far more difficult, right? Because the information is more convincing. It looks more like something really generated by a human. It's possible for those who are trying to generate and spread disinformation, it becomes easier and cheaper for them to do more of it and faster and better. And so I think that, we already have this situation where we've seen, of course, dramatic sort of distrust in media outlets and journalists. We see increasing, I think, distrust in sort of the academic world and higher education, and that's seen as something that is also politicized in some way. And so I think that the concern is that this will only kind of exacerbate those sources, those feelings of distrust, in the sense, even for people who might not have already been feeling that way. I certainly now feel like, do I know if the cover letters I'm receiving for a job application were written by the person or by ChatGPT? I'm sure that professors are thinking that about their students' papers. And so, I think that the idea that distinction becomes very difficult to discern, can generate not just a sense of distrust in the content you're looking at, but a sense of distrust in the people behind it. And that, to me, is really concerning in a context where we're already in a very polarized society, where everything feels, like it's part of our sort of political contestation. And, I think that the implications of that are something we're just kind of starting to understand, how generative AI might exacerbate some of those sort of broader societal dynamics that we've already been wrestling with, and I think seeing very serious implications of, but that I think may only get worse as people start to feel that they really can't know, where that line is between something that's sort of authentic and something that has been machine generated.
Right. It almost makes you think, when I'm writing something, I almost feel like saying, like, yes, I actually wrote this.
Right.
I mean, kind of, do we need some way of signaling to the readers, what, and I think, I mean, for on the submission side, of academic writing, that, we're starting to see editorial policies to say, well, you need to reveal, how
Yes.
these, did you use these tools? How did you use them, etc. Becomes very difficult in terms of, citing, because if you don't know what the source is, then, and, we kind of frown upon that. In academic writing, you want to reference your sources. I mean, we're very, we try to, train our students and the next generation to understand the respect for others' intellectual property,
Right.
and the difference between, the importance of innovation and originality and original interpretation, original contribution. I mean, that, we tell our students, you need to make a contribution, a theoretical contribution, a substantive addition to the thinking in your field. It's not good enough to just regurgitate and, just kind of summarize, what happened before. That's just the ground that you stand on. Then what did you bring to it? And so, we understand that when we read a scholarly article, what those, or an academic book, what the foundation piece of it is and what the new thinking piece of it is and how that's, organized. But, that's just all thrown to the wind in, in this kind of situation, which, in terms of, say, the literacy of the reader, to be able to discern, I mean, how can you tell? And so on the writer side, what should we do to be able to signal to the readers, when, perhaps, to say, well, while I, turn to this tool to, help identify some key problems to study, here's what I did, but
Right.
it's, you think you need entirely new forms of writing to be able to, to engage your readers and to rebuild that trust. Because, I mean, to me, the other side of what you're saying is it's also a further devaluing the work of writers, because it's kind of like, well, why, we're seeing this with the writer's strike now underway.
Exactly.
Why pay people to write when you can just regurgitate some mishmash of existing text, because it's not coming up with something new. It's just, reorganizing pieces it pulled together from other sources that already existed. So, it's not, the new discovery piece is not there, but maybe, people who are not, say, literate to the value of that, would even notice that that's missing.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. And obviously in the report, we talk about the writer's strike as well. And I think what we're seeing in that context is something that's going to spread to other industries as well, where, I mean, writing, of course, is a piece of many different industries.
Right.
And I think there is real concern about what this means, for people who have made that their career. And, again, I think what you're saying goes also to another point that, both in the context of Hollywood and in academics, I think nobody really wants to fully restrict the use of these tools either, right? I mean, I think, if you look at what the writer's strike is actually sort of demanding, it's not that the tools would never be used, but that, that writers would still be compensated equally, regardless of whether the tools were somewhere used in the process, and that you wouldn't end up in a situation where writers are just kind of brought in to, clean up the work that the generative AI tools have done for far less than they would normally be paid for actually doing the work to begin with. And I think in academics too, lots of institutions are not trying to say that students can't use ChatGPT or other generative AI tools at all, but what are sort of the guidelines and the guardrails you're going to put around that, so that there is clarity around when they're being used and how they're being used and when they shouldn't be used.
Right.
And so, I do think that's all just kind of uncharted territory that people are kind of trying to figure out at this point. But I do really worry about the implications. I think, again, in the context of the writer's strike, it's not like people really think generative AI is going to be able to create the next Breaking Bad or, some sort of brilliant piece of work. But in the context of things like, reality shows or children's television or things that are a little bit more formulaic, there's real concern that you could basically get away with replacing writers for a lot of that. And I think we're going to continue to see the concern of that kind of spread to different sectors as well.
Right. And of course, for academic writers, we're not organized. I mean, in some countries, academics do have a union, but for the most part, that's not the case. And we work, very independently. So, there's no way for us to go on strike. I mean, who would we strike against? There's not, because the publishers are not antagonistic to, we're like on the same team. So, there's very little cloud. And I think, the questions about the copyright and protection of intellectual property, are, they're big issues that, are beyond the control of an individual writer. But I mean, to me, it's simply mind-boggling, to read not only your report, but the recent report by The Atlantic about the pirated books, taking, the copy. So it's one thing to be collecting data, as they've been doing since the internet began, of personal data and informal posts and all of that that's been collected already, and which is a different kind of concern about privacy. But it's something else to be taking the entire catalog of the Oxford University Press and just without any permission, where you're like, wait a minute, this is what happened to copyright or Creative Commons, where, say, because there's kind of the argument of, oh well, look at music, look at jazz, people improvise, or rap, where people incorporate things from the past. And you're like, that's different.
Not quite the same.
That's different than what we're talking about here. And, with Creative Commons, where you had the choice, yes, you can use my material as long in a non-commercial way if you credit me, or you can use it in a commercial way, or you can use it and mash it up, or you can use it, but I want, you have to retain the integrity of this piece. You have some choice of that. And with this, suddenly, like, no choice at all. Just, we're not even going to tell you. I don't know whether my books have been pirated. How would I find out? They certainly didn't ask me, and they certainly didn't pay me. But, I'm reading about the millions and billions that are being poured into the AI research, and I'm thinking, surely some of that ought to go to the people who actually created the content you are using.
And we definitely are seeing lawsuits to that effect, right? A number of writers have sued some of the AI companies to say, you used my work without permission, you violated my copyright. And, I think it will be very interesting to see how that plays out. In some cases, authors who have a significant corpus of work can have basically asked the tools to write something in their style and seen how good of a job of that they can do, and taken that as a signal that their work is all in there. And so, I think that it also kind of baffles my mind that the companies didn't think this is going to be an issue of any kind. And, I think our colleagues over at the Authors Guild have also done a lot of work on issues of copyright, and they've been very much on top of this. Definitely recommend people check out some of their work on the copyright elements of this too. But I think it's really concerning. It's definitely a concern within the writing community, and as you say, within sort of the broad writing community, academic, creative, and journalistic too.
Well, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about what PEN is doing. I mean, we see this report, which will be linked into the post, so our readers can take a look at it. But what are some of the other actions that you're involved with, and what other recommendations do you have for writers who want to get involved in this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would really recommend people really educate themselves about sort of what's happening with this, and it's all evolving very quickly. Writing this report, I always say, was like building the plane while flying it, because the news was coming out literally every day. New things were happening. New news was breaking on these issues, and so we really wanted to put this out there to say, here are some of the issues that we're going to be watching. We don't know exactly how they're all going to evolve, but these are things we think people need to be paying attention to. And we offered at the end some sort of guiding principles for things that we think policymakers and industry need to be thinking about and taking into consideration, to ensure that the sort of free expression and human rights issues as a whole are not ignored as this technology moves forward. We should try to learn some of the lessons that we have seen from social media, from disinformation, and some of the other issues that we've been dealing with over the past decade or so, and not kind of repeat some of those mistakes going forward. So, we've called on, for engagement with civil society, with people impacted by generative AI, whose work is being utilized, for them to have a voice in this process, for ownership to be respected and compensated, and for policymakers to also just be thoughtful about how they move forward on this, so that they're not also, as I said, sort of putting in place solutions that could inadvertently constrain people's free expression as well. Because again, writers do want to be able to make use of these tools. New regulations that are made kind of hastily in the face of new technology, could inadvertently create new restrictions on creation and free expression that we wouldn't want to see either. There are already, laws and regulations in place that could apply to a lot of this. Again, this is the basis of a lot of this is a copyright law issue, and so it's not necessarily demanding a bunch of new solutions, but we do need to think really about where the challenges are and what the implications are for free expression and for other rights. We are in sort of ongoing conversations with a lot of the tech companies and with policymakers in Washington. We've definitely gotten, heard good feedback about the report from folks who have read it, and we're kind of trying to, but obviously some of the generative AI companies are sort of new to the scene, so we don't have a sort of longstanding relationships there, starting to try to get into conversations with them as well. And we've had longstanding relationships with the social media platforms and been able to build some constructive conversations there over the years on issues like disinformation and online abuse. And so, I think we'll be trying to do the same thing in this context as well. And then I think, we'll really be continuing to listen to our community of writers. We're a membership organization. If people want to be a member, by the way, you should, or you can go to pen.org. It is open to writers of all kinds. And so, that's really most of the reason that we work on issues of disinformation, on issues of online abuse, is because we were hearing about them from our community of writers before they were really things that people were talking about in a widespread way. And so I think, we'll be continuing to listen and see where the concerns are really emerging and what some of the things are that we feel PEN could have a unique voice. And part of the reason we wanted to put this report out is, we had seen some conversations about sort of the human rights implications of generative AI, but actually nothing really looking specifically at the free expression component and thinking about this sort of broader question of what does this mean for the meaning of the written word? What does it mean for writers in particular? And so that was, something we really wanted to bring to the conversation, and we want to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think that, and I appreciate all of that, and I will include the links so that people can follow those and see, get more information and see how to get involved. I think in some ways it calls on us as writers to really reflect on, what is it that I do that is important? Sometimes we're so busy doing what we're doing, especially when we're doing, academic writing is incredibly rigorous and time consuming, and often people are doing that on top of teaching or some other, professional responsibilities. And, having written books, I know, the nights and weekends that go into this. And the fact that, it's in your head, like, even if you're doing something else, you're still thinking it through. But, to step back and say, what is it about the human writer, that brings something unique? What is it that I really have to contribute and to be able to articulate that? Because one of the points that you made in the report about the spark of imagination, it drives creativity, and I think for academic writers it's the spark of imagination and curiosity, where I say I see this problem, why is this happening? What are the dimensions of it? How does it affect real people's lives? What are, is it an individual personal problem? Is it a societal problem? How can I, how can I dig into that? And so there's a real, freedom of thought that is needed to be able to explore that. And, at MethodSpace, I mean, we've been very concerned about the constraints and chilling on those activities,
Right.
because, if it's an issue that suddenly this week somebody has decided is a controversial topic that wasn't controversial before, you've been
Yes.
working in this for years, but now it's a hot button issue, are you going to study it? Are new researchers going to be constrained from pursuing those difficult questions or those sensitive questions that we really need to understand? So I think, we certainly have, there's that, kind of fear and chilling, but at the same time, I hope that, for those who are watching, to really step back and think about, yes, what I do is important. It's different than what a robot can do.
Yes.
And, how can I really affirm that? How can I explain that? Because it may sound as very kind of abstract and touchy-feely, and it's how do I put that into words? To stand up for the value of that spark that is human, that comes from the introspection and also the observation of society and what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, I think in the report, we also talk about the fact that part of the reason PEN exists as an organization is the belief that writing has this vital role to play in society, that literature can build empathy and understanding and bridge across divides, and that writing of all kinds must serve that essential role to, to spark other people to question and think and to feel inspired and to better understand one another and our world. And, that our whole organization and the sort of global PEN network that we're a part of was established really to celebrate and to protect that. And I think that, this is, a new form of, again, we tried not to be totally apocalyptic about this. There are things about it that could be good for writers and for creativity as well. But it is also very much a threat. And I think that thinking very carefully about how we can, reap the benefits of new technology without losing the sort of essential value of writing and of academic work, of journalism, of these sort of pillars of our democracy, is sort of the challenge before us.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to hearing more about the work of PEN as you continue to stand up for all writers. And I hope that for the viewers of this interview, you'll have some pathways you can go follow to gain some more information and see how to get involved.
Thank you so much for having me, Janet.